Hi friends, welcome back to my channel. My name is Dana and I am so excited to be sharing my love of makeup and beauty with you all. We're nearing the end of the year, so I thought I would take some time to do some reminiscing about the makeup that I have purchased in 2021. I really thought I had done a great job of cutting down on how much makeup I've purchased, but when I sat down to rank all of my purchases, I realized I had 34 palettes alone. So I have actually split these into two videos. I have a favorites and fails of non-palettes and then a ranking of my palettes. So today I thought I would share with you my ranking of all of the palettes I bought in 2021. I have them ranked from my least to my most favorite. I did buy all these palettes in 2021, but some of them were released in 2020. Some of them are a little bit older. We have ended up with the ranking sort of split into 4 categories, which I'll explain as we go. This video is going to be pretty long, so I hope you are able to stick with me. Let's get started. My first category includes my bottom 7 palettes. I don't like these. I think they are relatively bad quality, and in general I wouldn't recommend them to anybody, or maybe a very select few people. The bottom, number 34, is a palette I have already decluttered, and that is the e.l.f. Acai You Bite-Sized Eyeshadow. I know these are quite popular and they are very cheap, but even for that affordable price, I would not recommend this. It is patchy. It was very difficult to work with. It was it wasn't very pigmented. It had a ton of fallout. Overall, really hated it. I would say save your money, buy a Colourpop palette for a couple dollars more. Another palette I have decluttered, this is the Ofra Signature palette in Galaxy. It is the sort of 5-pan purpley one. In my personal opinion, Ofra shadows have no business being as expensive as they are. They are not very pigmented. They do not blend well. The shimmers are very beautiful, but the mattes just aren't. This was a very, very pale palette, and it's not advertised as a pastel, but that's how it looks on the eyes. Did not like it, did not get along with it. Really kind of bummed me out because at the time that I bought it, I really was excited about it, and I love purple shadows, and it just didn't work for me, so would not recommend. In that same vein, number 32 is the Ofra Signature palette in Empowered. I liked the color story a little bit better in this one, but again, it was advertised as this sort of dark and grungy palette. It was not. It was a very, very light green. You really couldn't get very much depth with it. Overall, I just didn't enjoy it, and there are so many green palettes that I tried this year that are so much better. Just not my favorite. Number 31, we have the e.l.f. Bite-Sized Eye palette in Cream and Sugar. I did end up keeping this one because it is significantly better quality than the Acai You. It is very plain and simple, and you really can only make one look with it. And because it's neutral, even though it is still a little bit patchy, you can get away with it a little bit more than you can with a blue palette. I think this one's okay. I still don't know that I'd recommend this to people. I still think getting a Colourpop 5-pan or a quad would be a better use of your money. But it's not the worst palette. I do still have it, and I probably will keep it around for when we're eventually able to travel properly again. At number 30, I have the Colourpop and Animal Crossing New Horizons 5-Star Island quad. I did buy 2 of these. I've ranked them separately. These aren't awful. They're usable. It's fine. I would not classify these as true Colourpop quality. I don't think they're as good. There is a pressed glitter in here. I knew that when I bought it. I shouldn't have bought them. I don't like pressed glitters. As well as the darkest matte here is, I don't know if you can see that, it is a sparkly matte, which I find makes it difficult to use. I wish they would stop doing that. I don't like sparkly mattes. I think they're weird. But I don't mind it. It's not the worst, but overall, I still wouldn't recommend these, and they're very expensive for a Colourpop product. I think that's the licensing fee there. I just don't think they're that great. I wouldn't recommend. Number 29 really disappointed me. This is the Colourpop and Pull Up for Change Make It Fearless palette. This was a fantastic collaboration that was done at the sort of height of the news coverage of the Black Lives Matter movement, and brands were theoretically trying to support and to advocate for people of color. This palette specifically, I thought, was meant to be a response to the very valid criticism Colourpop has received that their color stories are often too whitewashed and they really need to cater to deeper skin tones. And that was what I thought this palette was going to be. And to some extent it does. But the colors are quite patchy, and overall the quality is not as good as the standard Colourpop, which I think sends a really negative message. Overall, I just didn't love this. I think it's fine. You can still use it, but I just don't think it achieved what it was going for. And there is a lot of fallout with it. I just wish they had done like proper, true Colourpop quality shadows for this one, because the color story is great, and I think it would have been a lot better if it had been better quality. And at the top of this bottom category, we have the Colourpop and Animal Crossing Nook Ink palette. This one is the green one. I like the color story of this one quite a bit better as well. The sparkly matte is not the darkest shade, it's the mid matte shade, which I find a little bit easier to use. Again, it's still not perfect. They're still pretty patchy, but I think this one is better than the other one. The pressed glitters, I don't like them anyway. I still wouldn't recommend you buy this one, but I don't dislike it, and I do still use it. This next category includes 8 palettes that I think are fine. They're not bad, they're not great, and there's definitely some things I would change with them, but overall, I think they were decent, and there are people I would recommend them to. Number 27 is the Juvia's Place Sweet Pinks palette. I did enjoy this palette. The quality is great. I think all of Juvia's Place shadows are pretty consistently great quality. I didn't like the color story on this one. And again, my own fault. I had seen what it looked like before I picked it up, but it just wasn't for me. I found it quite difficult to use, and I was always pairing it with another palette. Personally, I'm not a huge fan of companion palettes as a whole. I would rather have everything I need in a single palette. So that's just my preference, but I do think the palette was fine, and I have passed it on to a friend who was really excited about it, so I hope she gets a lot of use out of it, but it's just not for me. In that same vein, the next one at 26 is the BH Cosmetics Smitten in Switzerland palette. The photos online made it look like this was going to be a little brighter, a little more colorful, but it was actually a very subdued, sort of colorful, neutral palette. The quality was great, and I did make some very pretty looks with it, but it just wasn't what I was looking for. And I have passed that along to a friend who was really excited about it as well, so I hope that she gets to really explore some color in a safe, kind of neutral way. I think she'll enjoy it more than I would. The palette itself was great. There was nothing wrong with the quality, it just, the color story was not for me. Number 25, we have the Ofra and Samantha March palette. This is called Life's a Draft. I don't love Ofra shadows. I mentioned that earlier in the video. I think they are a little bit patchy and lighter than you would expect them to be in the pan. I'm also not a fan of Ofra's blushes or bronzers, although they work fine as eyeshadows. But the color story of this is really, really beautiful. And I do make some really pretty looks with this. So this is not a fail palette. I think it's fine. I wish I liked it more. I really like Samantha March, but I just don't like the formula. I can't get behind it. So currently this is the only Ofra palette I have in my collection, and it'll probably be the only one I have ever in my collection. I just don't anticipate ever wanting another formula like this. 24 is the Sigma Hazy palette in the On The Go collection, these little 9 pans. This is a really nice palette. The Sigma quality is pretty good. They are light, they're not as impactful as I kind of hoped they would be. I'd seen a lot of people compare them to like Anastasia Beverly Hills shadows, and I don't think they're quite that impactful. But it is a really pretty neutral palette. It's quite simple. My main issue with this is it's monotone. Really, no matter what shades you use in here, you are going to get pretty much the same look. Which is fine. I like the look you get from it. It is pretty, but it is very, very basic. So I don't think I'm going to purchase any more of these Sigma On The Go's, because I just wasn't a huge fan of this one. But it is nice, and I am going to keep it. I don't hate it. Next, at number 23, we have the BH Cosmetics Emerald palette. This is the May Birthstone palette. I bought this one because I love green eyeshadows, and my birthday is in May. And it's good. There's nothing particularly wrong with it. It is fairly monotone in that you are kind of going to get a pretty consistent look. There's only 2 mattes in here, which I find personally kind of difficult to work with. I imagine if you're better at eyeshadow than me, you can probably work with more shimmers. I can't, I'm not very good yet. I do like it. I wish this pressed glitter didn't exist, but I know they all have one. Personally, I think I would have done better with August's, which is Peridot. I think I just would have enjoyed that one more because it's a little bit lighter. But overall, it's a good palette, and if you like those sort of really nice, grungy, dark green looks, you would like this. It's great quality, it's just not my favorite kind of green. Spot number 22, we have the newest palette in this video, and that is the Colourpop and the Nightmare Before Christmas palette. The quality of this one is great, there's nothing wrong with it, and actually I like all of the colors in here. I just don't think this accurately represents the movie. The Nightmare Before Christmas is one of my favorite movies of all time. This palette is missing blues and greens. It needed to be in there. There is just too much sort of pink and purple when that isn't really any of the prominent colors in that movie. If I was to create a palette, it would be blacks, gray, white, green, blue, orange, maybe a pink. But I definitely wouldn't have 3 pinks and a purple in here. I think it's just a bit of a waste. I do like this palette and I am getting use out of it, but overall I found it quite disappointing. That being said, I knew the color story when I bought it, so it's my own fault for buying it. It's not like they surprised us with it. This is the Colourpop Cherry Crush palette, coming in at 21. I don't dislike this palette. I think the quality is great, the colors are really nice. My problem with this palette is entirely my own technique. I vastly prefer to have dark mattes and lighter shimmers. The shimmers in this palette are as dark, if not darker, than most of the mattes, and I find it really difficult to use. So I don't tend to make a whole look with just this palette. I find I have to reach into other palettes for other companion shades, which I don't like to do. Again, that's entirely my own thing. I think it's good quality, and I think if you like those really rich, reddy, cherry-colored shimmers, you might like this a lot. But it ranks a little bit lower just because it's not my favorite. And the last one in this category at number 20 is the Colourpop High Tide palette. I bought this at the same time as I bought the Cherry Crush. I like this one quite a bit more. I love the blues in here. I like that the shimmers are typically a little bit lighter, except for that one. But the mattes are really dry in this one. I have no idea why, because the mattes aren't dry in this one, but they're very, very dry in this one. And I find that means they're just harder to work with. Like, it's fine. It's a fine palette. Not my favorite kind of formula or anything like that, so it works, it's fine, but I wish the formula was a little different. Alright, the next category of 9 palettes is palettes that I think are really, really good, but they're not quite perfect. So there is something about them that I would change or that I don't love, but at the same time, I think they're fantastic. I would recommend them to lots of people. Number 19 is a palette I almost didn't include, but that is the Lethal Cosmetics Build Your Own palette that I made. I've just decided not to include Color Story in my ranking here because obviously I made this color story myself. I am quite happy with it. I think the quality is really, really good. The light mattes are fantastic and those shimmers are beautiful. The dark mattes fade terribly though. I have no idea why. I don't know if it's like bad technique or bad primer. Like, I don't know if I'm doing something wrong, but these two, every time I wear them, by like 6 hours in, they're just gone. They just disappear from my eyeball. It's really weird. I have no idea why, and I don't get any of that fading with the lighter colors in here. So quality-wise, it's a little bit strange because of the 12 shades in here, I love 10 of them, and 2 of them I just don't like. But I think Lethal is really, really good, and I am excited to see more from the brand. I just hope that they fix that fading issue. Number 18 is the Glamlight Street Taco palette. This is the Little Taco. I love this palette. I really enjoy it. The quality is really, really good. The neon colors, specifically sort of this orange and green and the purple, intimidate me a little bit, but they do prompt me to get out of my comfort zone a bit more, which I think is really fun. Again, I have the issue with this palette because the shimmers are as dark, if not darker, than all of the mattes, meaning it's hard to get like a deep matte look with it. But I do really enjoy it. The other gripe I have is that it's a pain in the butt to store. I know it's taco shaped because it's a taco palette, but it's so irritating. It's so hard to store. Number 17 is the Glamlight Glam Donut palette. Same sort of issue with this one. The mattes are the same depth as the shimmers. Some of the shimmers are actually even darker than their sort of counterparted mattes. I do tend to use this one in the middle a lot as an eyeshadow. I think it's meant to be a face highlighter, but I use it for my lids. I really like the quality of this one, and I like the color story a little bit better in this one. I'm not as intimidated by it, but I do just find it to be a bit tougher to use because of that sort of shimmer and matte matching. It's also such a pain to store. It's not flat, it's circular, it's just, I get it, it's a donut, it's cute. Why is it squishy? Spot number 16, I have the Gimme Glow Pastel Dreams palette. This one is relatively new to my collection. I love the color story in here, and the shimmers are insane. The shimmers are the most amazing things I've ever seen, and actually I almost would have preferred this palette to be all shimmer. My issue with this palette is the mattes. I am quite pale, and so sometimes pastels just don't show up on me at all because they blend right into my skin tone. These do that. They just disappear off my face. I found if I use like a white base with them, they tend to show up a little bit more, but just as a whole, they're really, really faint and they don't show up very well. So I tend to use this more as a companion palette, which is not my favorite because it was not cheap, and half the palette I don't use. But the half the palette I do use is phenomenal, so it ranks here because I do think that at least half of the palette is fantastic. I just think the other half is eh. And at number 15, we have a palette with almost the same issue, and that is the Odin's Eye Alva 2 palette. Now, some of the shades in here do not need a white base. Some of them show up really well. This orange is quite nice. But most of the mattes in here are so pale they barely show up on me, and I find that to be really frustrating when I'm trying to make a look. I find them to just be kind of difficult to deal with. But the majority of this palette, particularly the shimmers, are fantastic. Again, though, the shimmers are the darkest shades in this palette, and there are 2 pressed glitters. So it's just not a perfect palette, but I do think it's really nice and I like to use it. I enjoy it, it's just not my favorite. Spot number 13, we have the Lunar Beauty Moonspell palette. Again, this is one with fairly dark shimmers. I knew that when I bought it, I was expecting that, so I wasn't disappointed. But I do find this to be a little tougher to work with than I would have liked. That being said, I do really like this palette, particularly these 3 colors here, those 2 purples at the top. I think this is just a really, really good palette. I love the formula as well. I think they're really, really solid shadows. I just wish there were a few lighter shimmer options. Next we have the Huda Beauty Nude Obsessions palette. This is the light color. I love this. I was quite surprised by how much I love this. It is a very, very light palette. If you have a skin tone even slightly deeper than mine, I would say go with the medium. There is also a rich as well that I have, but I only received it today, so it's not included in this ranking. But I do really like this. It's so, so good for just really quick, easy, neutral looks. It looks so nice. It's so natural. I really love the shimmers in here. I think they're very dimensional. The only thing is this palette has very, very little depth. Even this dark shade is not very dark. It's not super pigmented. So you're not going to get a really sort of bulge look out of it. It's going to be very, very nude, as the name suggests, but I think it's really good and it does what it says it's going to. Spot number 12, I have the Natasha Denona Bronze palette. When I first got this, I actually wasn't even sure if I was going to keep it, but I do really like it. I think the quality is fantastic and it does create some very, very pretty looks. My issue with this palette is that it is very, very monotone. It's only going to do really the same kind of 3 looks over and over again. These 3 shades there and those 2 shades there are pretty much identical in the eye. So it just doesn't have a lot of variety and depth to it, which I feel like makes it less inspiring to look at, and I'm not as excited when I see this palette as some of my other ones. But that being said, I do like using it and it does create some really, really beautiful looks. So I'm glad I have it. I really enjoy it. I think it's a good palette and I think a lot of people would really love it, but I do think there are other palettes in my collection that I like just a touch more. And the last one in this category at spot number 11 is the Nomad Cosmetics Haunted Europe palette. This one was so close to making it in the top 10. I really, really like this palette. I think it's just got these super beautiful tones to it. The shimmers are really gorgeous. There are a couple shimmers in here that are a bit darker than I would have liked, but most of them are not. Even some of the ones that look really dark are actually a little more light and sparkly than you'd think they would be. I like the theming of this. I like almost everything about this. My only sort of issue with this is that I won't use this palette as much as I would have liked, just purely because it is so deep. I don't tend to wear very, very deep eyeshadows all the time. It's much more of a nighttime look thing for me, and you know, right now with the way the world is, I'm not going out very much, so I'm not going to get as much use out of it as I would have liked, but it is a really beautiful palette and I think it's fantastic. Alright, and now for my top 10 palettes. These ones were very difficult to rank because I love all of them so much. I did rank them, obviously, but it was tough. But these are my top palettes that I've tried this year. They are my absolute favorites, and they are palettes I would recommend to pretty much everyone. In spot number 10, we have Colourpop Big Poppy. This is the matte, sort of reddy orange one. I absolutely adore this palette. I think it is so, so pretty. I love the sort of versatility and the range in here. You go from very light to very deep. There's some more kind of bright orange in the middle. I think it's really, really good. I don't often wear all matte looks, but when I do, I tend to reach for this one or the next palette I'm going to talk about. But I do find these pair really well with sort of special single shadows as well. I think this is super good. I love it. And in spot number 9 is the Colourpop Little Ray of Sunshine. I bought these at the same time. This is the all matte yellow one. This one ranks just slightly higher because I do tend to wear yellows more than those sort of reds and oranges. Yellow is my go-to color when I'm feeling kind of blah and I need to pick me up. I love this for that. Again, beautiful all matte looks, or you can really amp this up with some gorgeous single shadows. I love how it goes from very light to very deep. I love this really sort of canary yellow in the middle. I just think this is a really, really solid palette and I love it. Number 8, I have a palette that surprised even me, and that is the Uoma Beauty and Coming to America 2 Queen to Be palette. I was amazed by how much I loved this palette, which looking back it should make sense. I really wanted the Musee Beauty Le Jardin palette when it was launched, and the color story is very, very similar to this one. My only gripe with this palette is that this shade here and that one there look very different on the eyes than they do in the pan, so you really kind of have to swatch them and try them first to get a good sense of what they're going to look like. But overall, I really love this palette for the spring and for the summer. It's got those beautiful kind of bold, colorful shades, but also almost pastels. They're just so pretty, and everything about this palette I love. I think it's great for the summer. Spot number 7, I have one of the last few remaining neutral palettes, and that is the Colourpop Limoncello palette. I really like this one. I was impressed by this a lot as well. It's got that sort of pop of yellow and the pop of blue, although they are muted. They're not very bold, so they work really well with the neutrals. I just think this is really nice. The quality was really, really good. It's very easy to work with. This sort of olivey green here, which I believe is called Capri, is just stunning. They're so pretty. It's so easy to work with. I do also have one of the shadow sticks that was launched at the same time as Limoncello, and it pairs really well with the palette too, so you can create a lot of really fun looks with it. Number 6, I have the Natasha Denona Love palette. This is one I wasn't sure I was going to buy when it initially launched. I actually bought it over a year later. It was a 2020 Valentine's Day launch, but I had a Sephora Rouge reward and I decided to treat myself. I'm so glad I did. The quality of this is insane. I love Natasha Denona shadows. I think they're really, really good. I like the variety in here. You do get some like true reds, some dark pinks, some light pinks, some purples. There is this sort of silvery shade there. I think it can do a lot. You still are going to kind of get a similar look each time, but there's probably 3 or 4 looks you can get from this one as opposed to like the bronze where it's 1 or 2. I really, really enjoy this palette and I'm so glad I own it, and every time I think that I want Natasha Denona Retro, this is the palette I pick up instead because a lot of the tones are fairly similar. I'm so glad I have this, and yeah, definitely a favorite this year. Cracking the top 5, we have Menagerie's Flight Club. This is the beautiful purpley kind of palette. I absolutely adore this palette. I love the sort of dimension in the shimmers. I love how like textured they are. I love the range and colors in the mattes. I do like those two neutral ones as well because you can lighten up a look or deepen it up. You get a lot of choice in here. I really, really enjoy this palette. I'm so glad I have it. My only gripe with it is that it does stain a little bit, so you do have to be cautious of that, especially with those darker mattes. But I mean, look at that little face. It's so cute. Palette number 4 will come as no surprise to anyone, and that is the Colourpop and Mandalorian The Child palette. This is the palette that got me into greens, and I just love it. It is definitely a more neutral palette. I think if you're not a color lover, this might be a little more colorful for you, but for me it's very, very neutral. But I'm obsessed. I love this palette. There's pretty much nothing in this palette that I would change. Yeah, no, I don't think there's anything in this palette I would change. I think it's fantastic. I think it's so, so good. It's so easy to use. You are going to get a fairly consistent kind of green, khaki, brown look with this. It's a 9-pan monochrome palette. That's what's coming. But it is just so good. I absolutely love this. And this would be probably one of the first palettes I would go out and repurchase if my entire collection disappeared. Spot number 3 is the Glaminatrix You Beauty palette. I waited a very long time for this palette and every second was absolutely worth the wait. This is phenomenal. It's so good. The mattes in here are absolutely beautiful. They're rich, they're pigmented, they're creamy, but they blend very well. But the standout in here is absolutely the shimmers. This shade down here called G'day is probably my favorite shimmer I've ever tried, ever, in the history of my makeup wearing. I think this is just the most amazing shade ever. But honestly, all of them are. Like, there's some duochromes, there's some beautiful shimmers. I think it's just an absolutely fantastic, fantastic palette. It is quite expensive, but I do think it's worth it. I love it. I'm so glad I own it. Palette number 2 came as a surprise to even me, because the first time I tried this brand, I hated everything about it, but that is the BH Cosmetics Avocado Toast palette. I tried BH Cosmetics years ago, back when I was a teenager, and at the time they were very poor quality. I didn't love them, but oh my god, have they stepped it up. This is amazing. This is so, so good. The quality of these shadows are insane, and they absolutely rival any sort of high-end palette that I have. The shimmers are really beautiful and impactful. The mattes are bold, but they blend very easily. I love the color story in here. You know, I love greens. I think this is just an insanely good palette. I definitely want to buy both Blueberry Muffin and the Mimosa palette as well, which are both from this brunch collection. I'm trying so hard not to because I don't need any more eyeshadow, but I want them so bad, and this is such a good palette. If there's a BH Cosmetics eyeshadow palette that's got a color story that's calling your name, specifically these brunch ones or the travel ones, I would say go for it. They're great. And my top palette, which actually was the only palette I did not have to think about, I knew exactly where it was going to rank from very early on, is the Kaleidos and Angelica Nyqvist Club Nebula palette. This, I would argue, is my perfect palette. I don't think there's a single thing in this palette that I would change. I love the depth, I love the versatility. I really like that there's no black, but you can get very deep even without it. I love the shimmers, that they can stand alone or be toppers. I just think this is such a good palette. There is absolutely nothing in this palette I would change. I don't even mind the packaging. It's bulky, but it's sturdy, it feels good. I don't mind it. I love it. I love this palette. I think it's absolutely phenomenal. I love this guy. This is definitely, hands down, my favorite. If you're still here after all of that, thank you so much for sticking with me. I know this was a very long video. What were your favorite and least favorite palettes of 2021? I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you in the new year. Bye!